Admiral Zektar stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, his four arms crossed behind his back as he gazed out at the swirling colors of hyperspace. The massive dreadnought, nearly 3 kilometers long, was the pride of the hegemony fleet. Its dark metal hull bore the scars of 1,000 victories, and its weapon systems could reduce entire planets to ash. "Sir," came the voice of his communications officer, a nervous Quillen whose tentacles twitched with excitement. "We're receiving the final reports from the Outer Rim territories. The last human colony has been located." Zektar's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a smile among his species. After 200 years of expansion across the galaxy, the hegemony had finally cataloged every inhabited world. Every species had either joined their empire willingly or been crushed beneath their military might. Every species except one: humans. The very name sent ripples of unease through the bridge crew. Not because they were particularly dangerous, quite the opposite. Humans were remarkably unremarkable. They had no natural armor like the Krillians, no psychic abilities like the Etherians, no advanced technology like the long-dead precursors. They were just ordinary, pink-skinned, bipedal creatures who had barely managed to colonize a handful of systems before the hegemony's expansion reached them. But that was exactly what made them so disturbing. "Humans," Zektar muttered, his voice carrying across the bridge. "They refused to surrender, refused to join, and refused to fight properly. They just disappear." It had been the same pattern for decades. When hegemony forces arrived at a human world, they would find empty cities, abandoned spaceports, and not a single living soul. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of where an entire population had gone. The humans simply vanished like ghosts, leaving behind only their strange art, their incomprehensible music, and their disturbing literature that spoke of never giving up, never surrendering. "What's the status of their homeworld?" Zektar asked, turning to his tactical officer. "Earth remains dark, sir. No response to our hails, no detectable energy signatures. Our long-range sensors show what appears to be a dead world. Perhaps they finally gave up and fled to unknown space." Zektar's second-in-command, Commander Thal, approached with a datapad. "Sir, the Council of Dominion has issued new orders. We're to proceed to the Sol system and conduct a final sweep. If we confirm that Earth is indeed abandoned, we can close the human file permanently." "Good," Zektar said. "I'll be glad to put this entire mystery behind us. Prepare the fleet for translation to real space. It's time to visit this Earth and see what secrets these vanishing humans left behind." The Eternal Dominion was not alone. 300 ships of various sizes accompanied it: battle cruisers, destroyers, carrier vessels, and support craft. It was the largest fleet the hegemony had ever assembled for what should have been a simple cleanup operation. But the humans had made them cautious. There was something unsettling about a species that could simply disappear from the galaxy without a trace. Hours later, the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. Immediately, every sensor array turned toward the third planet from the star, Earth. What they found was exactly what they expected: a blue and green world shrouded in clouds, showing no signs of artificial light on the dark side, no orbital platforms, no defensive installations. "Confirmed, sir," reported the sensor operator. "Earth appears to be uninhabited. No energy signatures, no ship traffic, no communications. It's as if the entire species just left. Or died," added Commander Thal grimly. Perhaps they finally realized the futility of resistance. But something bothered Zektar about the readings. The planet looked too perfect, too peaceful. In his experience, abandoned worlds showed signs of decay, failing infrastructure, spreading wilderness, atmospheric changes. Earth looked like a garden world in perfect condition. "Begin detailed scans," he ordered. "I want to know what happened here. Check for underground installations, hidden facilities, anything that might explain where 50 billion humans went. As the fleet moved deeper into the system, passing the lifeless rocks of the outer planets and the gas giants with their collection of moons, the sensor teams worked frantically to solve the mystery. They found the remains of human space stations, long since powered down and drifting. They detected the signatures of old mining operations on asteroids, abandoned but not destroyed. Everything suggested a controlled evacuation rather than a catastrophic event. "Sir," the communications officer called out, his tentacles practically vibrating with nervousness. "I'm detecting something strange." "Define strange," Zektar said, moving to the communications station. "It's music, sir. Very faint, coming from Earth. Old human music, something called classical. It's been broadcasting on a loop for what appears to be decades." Zektar felt his mandibles click nervously. "Show me." The main screen filled with a visual representation of the radio waves emanating from Earth. The signal was weak but persistent, carrying the haunting melodies that humans had created centuries ago. It was beautiful in an alien way and somehow deeply unsettling. Why would they leave music playing if they abandoned their world? Commander Thal wondered aloud. Before Zektar could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the bridge. The tactical officer's voice cut through the noise. "Sir, massive gravitational disturbance detected. Something large is dropping out of hyperspace." "Location?" Zektar barked. "Directly between us and Earth. Range, 200,000 kilometers and closing." On the main screen, space itself seemed to tear open. Reality bent and twisted as something enormous forced its way from hyperspace into normal space. What emerged defied every understanding the hegemony had of ship construction and physics. It was a single vessel, but it dwarfed even the Eternal Dominion. Nearly 10 kilometers long, its hull was a dark gray metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its design was unlike anything in hegemony databases, not the sleek curves they favored, nor the geometric patterns of other known species. It looked like it had been built for one purpose: war. Massive weapon batteries lined its hull, each gun larger than most hegemony destroyers. Engine exhausts the size of city blocks glowed with contained stellar fire, and along its length, in letters 3 stories tall, were symbols in the human language. UES, Retribution. "Impossible," breathed Commander Thal. "Human technology can't produce anything that large. Their ships are tiny, primitive things." But Zektar was studying the readings more carefully. The energy signatures coming from the human ship were off the charts. Its power output exceeded anything in the hegemony fleet. Its mass readings suggested armor plating thick enough to shrug off direct hits from their heaviest weapons. "Sir," the sensor operator's voice was barely a whisper, "I'm reading multiple additional signatures. There are more ships behind it." One by one, they appeared. Dozens of human vessels, each one massive by hegemony standards, each one bristling with weapons that the hegemony's computers couldn't properly identify. They arranged themselves in a perfect battle formation, with the Retribution at the center, like a sleeping dragon surrounded by its offspring. "Open communications," Zektar ordered, his voice steady despite the growing dread in his chest. "Let's find out what these humans want." The response came immediately, the voice speaking in perfect hegemony standard, tinged with an accent that sent chills down the spines of every crew member who heard it. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Space Command aboard the flagship Retribution. You are trespassing in sovereign human territory. You have exactly 60 seconds to begin withdrawal procedures before we consider your presence an act of war." Zektar felt his blood run cold. 60 seconds? The arrogance. His fleet could reduce any known military force to scrap metal. "This is Admiral Zektar of the Hegemony Eternal Fleet. You are outnumbered 3-1. Your people have fled the galaxy rather than face us. I suggest you reconsider your position." There was a pause, and when the human admiral spoke again, there was something in her voice that Zektar had never heard before when addressing the hegemony. Amusement. "Admiral, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We didn't flee the galaxy. We've been preparing for your arrival. You see, we had a choice when your empire started expanding in our direction. We could fight you with what we had and lose. Or we could disappear for a few decades and come back with something better. Guess which option we chose?" The implications hit Zektar like a physical blow. The vanishing colonies, the empty worlds, the perfect abandonment of Earth. It hadn't been retreat. It had been strategic withdrawal. While the hegemony had been cataloging empty human worlds and declaring victory, the humans had been elsewhere, building, preparing, planning. "Impossible," he said aloud. "No species can advance that quickly. Our scouts have mapped every system in this region. Where could you have gone?" "That's the beauty of three-dimensional thinking, Admiral. You mapped every system in this region of this galaxy. We found somewhere else entirely to set up shop, and now we're back, with a few friends we made along the way." As if summoned by her words, new contacts appeared on the hegemony sensors. Ships unlike anything they had ever seen, some crystalline and beautiful, others mechanical and precise, still others that seemed to be grown rather than built. The human fleet was not alone. "Let me introduce you to the Coalition of Free Worlds," Admiral Chen continued, her voice now carrying an edge of steel. 37 species who were all very interested to hear about an empire that demands surrender or death. Some of them have been looking for the hegemony for a very long time. Zektar's tactical officer looked up from his station, his face pale with fear. "Sir, I'm reading over 2,000 vessels now. The energy signatures, some of them are reading as impossible. It's like they're powered by captured stars." "Your 60 seconds are up, Admiral Zektar," came the human voice. "I'm going to ask you one more time nicely. Leave our space. The next time we meet, we'll be coming to yours. And when we do, we'll be bringing some very pointed questions about what happened to all those species that chose to join your empire." Zektar looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. For 200 years, the hegemony had been the undisputed masters of this region of space. They had never encountered anything they couldn't conquer or destroy. But now, staring at the impossible human fleet and their mysterious allies, he began to understand why his species had legends about nightmares that came alive in the dark between stars. "All ships," he said quietly into his communicator. "Begin withdrawal procedures. We're leaving. Now." As the hegemony fleet began its retreat, Admiral Chen's voice followed them one last time. "Oh, and Admiral, when you report back to your superiors, tell them we said hello. We'll be dropping by soon to discuss terms, human terms." The last thing Zektar saw before his fleet jumped to hyperspace was the human flagship turning slowly, deliberately, to face in the direction of hegemony space. Even at this distance, he could swear he could see weapon ports opening along its massive hull like a predator baring its teeth. For the first time in hegemony history, they were the ones running away. And somehow, Zektar knew that this was only the beginning of their nightmare. Supreme Chancellor Vexmore slammed all four of his fists onto the obsidian table, sending shockwaves through the emergency session of the Hegemony High Council. Around the circular chamber, representatives from dozens of species sat in stunned silence as Admiral Zektar's report concluded. "You're telling me," Vexmore's voice echoed off the crystal walls, "that a single human fleet made our entire expeditionary force retreat without firing a shot?" "Not just humans, Supreme Chancellor," Zektar replied, his mandibles clicking nervously. "The readings indicated at least 30 different species, many with technology beyond our current understanding. Their flagship alone could have destroyed half our fleet." Councillor Reth, a spindly Etherian with glowing blue eyes, leaned forward. This makes no sense. Our intelligence reports showed humans as technologically inferior. Primitive chemical rockets, basic energy weapons, no defensive shields worth mentioning. That was 50 years ago, Zektar said. They've been preparing. War Master Gorth, a massive Krillian whose armored hide bore the marks of countless battles, laughed bitterly. Preparing? For 50 years? No species advances that quickly? It took us 300 years to develop our current fleet technology. Perhaps, came a quiet voice from the shadows. That's exactly what they wanted us to think. Every head turned toward the speaker, Spy Master Null, whose species was so secretive that even the council didn't know their true name or appearance. The figure wore a hooded cloak that seemed to absorb light. Explain, Vexmore commanded. We've been studying human behavior patterns for decades. Unlike every other species we've encountered, humans don't think in terms of single generations. They plan for their great-great-grandchildren's wars. What if their disappearance wasn't panic, but strategy? The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. You're suggesting they evacuated entire worlds as part of a long-term plan? Counselor Reth asked. More than that, Null continued. I believe they used our own expansion as cover. While we were cataloging empty human worlds and declaring victory, they were establishing themselves somewhere beyond our sensor range. Building, learning, growing. Vexmore's eyes narrowed. Where could they go that our deep space monitors wouldn't detect them? Before Null could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the council chamber. Emergency lights bathed the room in red as a communications officer rushed in. Supreme Chancellor, we're receiving a transmission on all channels simultaneously. It's the humans. On screen, Vexmore commanded. The holographic display activated, showing a woman in a crisp military uniform standing on what appeared to be the bridge of a starship. Her hair was silver, her eyes steady, and when she spoke, her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who held all the cards. Greetings, Hegemony High Council. I'm Admiral Sarah Chen of the Coalition of Free Worlds. We met briefly at Earth, but I thought a proper introduction was in order. How did you bypass our security networks? Vexmore demanded. Admiral Chen smiled. The same way we've been monitoring your communications for the past 30 years. You really should upgrade your encryption protocols. The words hit the council like a physical blow. 30 years of intercepted communications meant the humans knew their military strength, their political structure, their territorial disputes, everything. What do you want? Vexmore asked through gritted teeth. Want? We want what every species wants, to exist peacefully without threat of conquest or subjugation. Unfortunately, your empire has made that impossible for quite a few civilizations over the past 2 centuries. Admiral Chen gestured, and the display split to show various star maps. The Altarian Commonwealth, extinct after refusing to surrender their homeworld. The Vegan Republic, now slave colonies after their leaders were executed for treason against the hegemony. The Rigelian hives, sterilized because your forces couldn't figure out how to communicate with them. Each name was accompanied by images that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Ancient history, War Master Gorth snarled. The galaxy is stronger under unified rule. Is it? Admiral Chen asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've turned a galaxy full of diverse, creative civilizations into a collection of identical, fearful colonies. That's not strength, War Master. That's cancer. The insult sent Gorth to his feet, his armor plates rattling with rage. You dare? I dare quite a bit, actually, Admiral Chen interrupted. For instance, I dare to broadcast this conversation to every world in your empire simultaneously. Say hello to your subjects, Council. Panic rippled through the chamber. Their private emergency session was being transmitted across the entire hegemony. Turn it off! Vexmore commanded. "We can't, sir," the communications officer replied frantically. "They've completely taken over our networks." Admiral Chen continued as if nothing had happened. "Citizens of the hegemony, this is Admiral Chen of the Coalition of Free Worlds. Today you have a choice. The first real choice many of you have had in generations. You can remain under the rule of the High Council, or you can join us in building something better." "Impossible," Spy Master Null whispered. "Our subject worlds don't have the infrastructure to rebel. We control their communications, their transportation, their food distribution." "You controlled them," Admiral Chen corrected. "Past tense. You see, we've been very busy these past few decades. Did you really think the only thing we were doing out there was building warships?" New images appeared on the screen. Coalition vessels dropping supplies on dozens of worlds. Human engineers working alongside alien civilians to construct new facilities. Advanced medical technology being distributed to species that had been denied proper health care under hegemony rule. "For the past 10 years, we've been providing covert aid to your subject worlds. Better food distribution networks, independent power generation, secure communications that your monitors can't intercept. We've been teaching them to be self-sufficient again." Vexmore felt his heart sink as he understood the scope of what the humans had accomplished. It wasn't just a military operation. It was a complete subversion of their entire empire. "And now," Admiral Chen continued, "we're offering them something the hegemony never has. Freedom to choose their own path. Some will choose independence. Others will ask to join our coalition. A few might even stay loyal to you, though I suspect those will be in the minority." "You're destroying the work of centuries," Counselor Reth protested. "No," Admiral Chen replied calmly. "We're undoing the damage of centuries. There's a difference." As if summoned by her words, reports began flooding in from across the hegemony. Worlds declaring independence, colonial governors requesting immediate evacuation, entire star systems going dark as local populations seized control of hegemony installations. War Master Gorth stepped forward, his massive frame trembling with rage. "You think you can destroy us with propaganda and rebellion? We still have the largest military force in the galaxy. We'll crush every rebel world and make examples of them." "Will you?" Admiral Chen asked, and for the first time, there was steel in her voice. "Because I have some friends who would like to discuss that with you." The display changed again, showing a tactical overview of hegemony space. Red dots appeared across the map, each representing coalition fleet positions. "That's impossible," Admiral Zektar breathed. "We would have detected fleet movements of that size." "You would have," Admiral Chen agreed, "if we had moved them through normal space. But you see, one of our coalition partners is a species called the Architects. They've been playing with space-time a lot longer than the rest of us. Turns out there are ways to travel between stars that don't involve hyperspace at all." The red dots weren't just scattered randomly, they were positioned at strategic choke points, supply routes, and major installations throughout hegemony territory. The humans and their allies hadn't just infiltrated the Empire, they had surrounded it. "You have a choice to make, High Council," Admiral Chen said. "You can try to fight a war you can't win against enemies you can't find, using resources from worlds that no longer answer to you. Or you can accept that the age of the hegemony is over and work with us to build something better." "Never," Vexmore snarled. "The hegemony will never surrender to inferior species." Admiral Chen sighed. "I was hoping you'd say that. It makes what comes next so much easier to justify." The tactical display zoomed in on a single system, Kethmore, the industrial heart of the hegemony. Massive shipyards, weapons factories, and resource processing plants orbited the system's 3 inhabited worlds. "Kethmore produces 40% of your military hardware," Admiral Chen noted. "It would be a shame if something happened to it." "You wouldn't dare attack a civilian target," Counselor Reth said, though his voice shook with uncertainty. "Who said anything about attacking?" Admiral Chen smiled. "We prefer more elegant solutions." On the display, space near the Kethmore shipyards began to ripple and distort. Massive structures appeared, not ships, but something entirely different. They looked like crystalline flowers blooming in the vacuum of space, each one easily the size of a small moon. "Architect deep space manipulators," Admiral Chen explained. "They can rewrite the fundamental properties of matter at the quantum level. Very useful for turning weapons factories into, say, recreational parks." "Impossible," War Master Gorth whispered. But the evidence was right there on the screen. The hegemony's most important military installation was dissolving, its metal structures transforming into something that resembled a vast garden suspended in space. Ships that had been under construction were becoming artistic sculptures. Weapons meant to enforce hegemony rule were turning into abstract monuments to peace. "The change is irreversible, by the way," Admiral Chen added casually. "The molecular structure has been fundamentally altered. You can't just rebuild on top of it." Similar transformations were beginning at other key installations across the tactical display. Military academies becoming universities, weapons research facilities turning into medical centers. Prison worlds where political dissidents were held becoming rehabilitation colonies. "This is war!" Vexmore shouted. "No," Admiral Chen replied quietly. "This is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an unjust object. War would be messier, bloodier, and much more unpleasant for everyone involved. This is just renovation." Communications began pouring in from across the Empire, reports of hegemony military assets being neutralized without a single shot fired, coalition vessels appearing in orbit around major worlds, not as conquerors but as liberators, offering aid and protection to anyone who wanted to leave the hegemony system. The great empire that had ruled through fear and force for 2 centuries was collapsing not in a blaze of battle, but in a cascade of defection and voluntary dissolution. "You have one more choice to make," Admiral Chen said, as the display returned to show her face. "You can continue to resist and watch as every world under your control chooses freedom over tyranny. Or you can accept the inevitable and help us build a galaxy where every species has the right to determine its own destiny." Vexmore looked around the council chamber at the faces of his fellow leaders. Fear, confusion, and growing desperation stared back at him. The empire they had spent their lives building was crumbling around them, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. What are your terms?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly. "No terms, no surrender documents, no trials for war crimes, though we will be very interested in helping displaced populations find new homes. The hegemony ends today, but that doesn't mean your people can't find a place in what comes next. The galaxy is big enough for everyone. We just need to stop trying to own all of it." The transmission ended, leaving the High Council in stunned silence. Outside the chamber windows, they could see coalition ships taking positions around the capital world. Not threatening, not aggressive, just present. A reminder that the age of the hegemony was over, and the age of the coalition had begun. Spymaster Null spoke into the silence. "The humans never intended to fight us directly. They spent 50 years turning our own empire against us. They've just won the most complete victory in galactic history without firing a shot." And in that moment, every member of the High Council understood that they hadn't just lost a war. They had been outthought, outmaneuvered, and outplayed by a species they had dismissed as primitive and harmless. The nightmare wasn't the human warships or their impossible technology. The nightmare was that the humans had been right. 6 months after the fall of the hegemony, Dr. Kayla Threen stood on the observation deck of the orbital research station above Vega Prime, watching something she had never thought she would see again: her homeworld healing. The Vegan Republic had been one of the first casualties of hegemony expansion, conquered over a century ago when her great-grandmother was still young. For generations, her people had lived as subjects, their scientific achievements dismissed, their cultural traditions suppressed. Their natural curiosity channeled into whatever projects the hegemony deemed useful. Now, ships from dozens of worlds moved in peaceful formation below her. Not hegemony enforcement vessels, but coalition science ships, medical frigates, and cultural exchange vessels. Where once there had been uniform gray structures marking hegemony administrative zones, new buildings rose in the traditional vegan style. Organic curves that flowed with the landscape, living walls that purified the air, spires that reached toward the stars her people had once dreamed of exploring freely. Still getting used to the view? Kayla turned to find Captain Maria Santos approaching, the human officer's smile warm and genuine. Maria commanded the coalition science vessel Endeavor, which had been instrumental in helping Vega Prime rebuild its research infrastructure. "Every day I expect to wake up and find this was all a dream," Kayla admitted. "For my entire life, the hegemony seemed like a fact of nature, unchangeable, eternal. The idea that humans could bring it down without massive bloodshed still seems impossible." Maria joined her at the observation window. "That's because you're thinking like most species do, in terms of direct confrontation. Humans learned a long time ago that the best way to win a war is to make the enemy realize they were fighting for the wrong things." "But the planning involved," Kayla shook her head. 50 years of coordinated effort across dozens of species, countless operations, all while maintaining the illusion that humanity had simply vanished. "How did you keep such a massive secret?" "We didn't," Maria said, surprising her. "Secrets that big always leak eventually. Instead, we made sure that when information did get out, no one would believe it or act on it effectively. The hegemony's own arrogance was our best ally." They watched as a transport ship from Earth approached the station. Its cargo holds full of educational materials and cultural artifacts that would help former hegemony worlds reconnect with their pre-conquest histories. It was one of hundreds of such ships making similar deliveries across the galaxy. "Your people really plan to give all this away?" Kayla asked. "The technology, the resources, the strategic advantages you've gained? Most species would use that power to build their own empire." Maria's expression grew thoughtful. "That's where you're wrong about human nature. We learned something important during our early space exploration. The galaxy is huge and full of wonders, but it's also dangerous and often lonely. The best way to survive out here isn't to conquer everything you encounter. It's to make friends with it." A chime indicated an incoming transmission. Admiral Chen's image appeared on a nearby communication screen, her silver hair now showing signs of the stress she'd been under during the transition period. "Maria, Dr. Threen," she nodded in greeting. "I wanted to update you on the latest developments. We've just received confirmation from the Altarian survivors. They're ready to begin resettlement of their homeworld. The architects have finished healing the environmental damage from the hegemony bombardment." Kayla felt a chill. The Altarian Commonwealth had been wiped out over 70 years ago, their entire population supposedly lost when they refused hegemony demands. To learn that survivors had been found was miraculous. "How many?" she asked. "About 2 million, scattered across hidden colonies and asteroid fields and rogue planets," Admiral Chen replied. "They've been living in exile since the bombardment, keeping their culture alive in secret. The Coalition fleet found them during our expansion operations." "And they trust you enough to return home?" Kayla asked. After decades of hiding from any organized space power, she imagined the Altarians would be extremely cautious. Admiral Chen smiled. "It took some convincing. But when we showed them footage of hegemony worlds choosing freedom, when we let them monitor our communications with other species, When we invited them to participate in coalition planning sessions as full partners rather than subjects, trust began to build. It was a pattern Kayla had seen repeated across the galaxy. Species that had been enemies under hegemony rule were working together on massive reconstruction projects. Scientists who had been forced to develop weapons were collaborating on medical research. Artists who had been censored were sharing their work freely across interstellar networks. "Admiral," Maria said, "what's the status on the former hegemony leadership?" "That's complicated," Admiral Chen admitted. "Most of the High Council members have accepted positions in the new galactic mediation framework. Vexmore is actually proving quite useful. Turns out, when you remove the need to maintain power through fear, he's actually a gifted administrator. War Master Gorth has been working with our security forces to identify and shut down remaining military holdouts. And Spy Master Null disappeared completely," Admiral Chen shrugged. "Though we've been finding evidence that they've been secretly providing intelligence to help us locate hidden hegemony black sites and political prisoners. I suspect we'll never know their true identity, but they seem to be on our side now." It was remarkable, Kayla thought, how quickly former enemies could become allies when the underlying system of oppression was removed. The hegemony had maintained control through fear and scarcity. Fear of punishment for disobedience, scarcity of resources that made worlds dependent on central authority. The coalition had simply removed both sources of control and watched as natural cooperation reasserted itself. "Dr. Threen," Admiral Chen continued, "I understand you've been working on a rather ambitious project?" Kayla nodded, unable to suppress her excitement. "The Galactic Heritage Archive. We're collecting cultural records, scientific knowledge, and historical information from every species we can contact. So much was lost during the hegemony expansion, art destroyed, languages forgotten, entire philosophical traditions erased. We want to preserve and share what remains. And what we're finding is incredible," Maria added. "Each species had unique solutions to scientific and social problems. The hegemony's standardization policies destroyed most of this diversity, but enough survived in hidden archives and oral traditions. We're essentially rediscovering centuries of lost innovation." Admiral Chen looked pleased. "That's exactly what we hoped would happen. Humans have always believed that diversity makes us stronger, but we needed to prove it on a galactic scale." "There have been challenges, though," Kayla said carefully. "Not every world is adapting well to sudden freedom. Some colonies are struggling with resource distribution without central authority. Others are having difficulty resolving ethnic or ideological conflicts that the hegemony suppressed rather than solved." "Growing pains," Admiral Chen acknowledged. "We expected them. Freedom is harder than oppression in many ways. It requires people to make their own choices and live with the consequences. But we've found that most species adapt quickly when they realize they can ask for help without giving up their independence." This was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the coalition model, Kayla reflected. Unlike the hegemony's centralized control or humanity's old United Nations, the coalition was fundamentally voluntary. Worlds could join, leave, or simply interact as trading partners without formal membership. There were no membership fees, no mandatory tribute, no forced standardization of laws or customs. "Speaking of adaptation," Maria said, "have you seen the latest reports from the former prison worlds?" Admiral Chen's expression brightened. "Some of our most successful rehabilitation projects. When we offered the guards and administrators the choice between punishment and redemption, most chose to help their former prisoners rebuild. Turns out a lot of them had just been following orders because they saw no alternative." Kayla had visited one of these worlds recently, a place that had once held political dissidents in horrific conditions. Now it was becoming a center for conflict resolution training, with former prisoners and guards working together to develop better methods of handling disputes between different species and cultures. The transformation is almost unbelievable, she said. But I keep wondering, what happens when you encounter a species that doesn't want to cooperate? That prefers conquest and domination? Not every culture in the galaxy shares human values. Admiral Chen's smile faded slightly. We're already encountering some of those challenges at the galaxy's edge. There are aggressive species out there that view our expansion as weakness rather than strength. We're learning that while we prefer peaceful solutions, we still need to be prepared to defend ourselves and our allies. But even then, Maria added, we try to find alternatives. Sometimes the most aggressive species are just responding to resource scarcity or historical trauma. Address the underlying causes, and you can often eliminate the aggression. A new alert chimed, and Admiral Chen glanced at something off-screen. I need to go. We're about to make first contact with a species that's been hiding in the galactic core since the early days of hegemony expansion. They finally agreed to meet with coalition representatives. After the transmission ended, Kayla and Maria stood in comfortable silence, watching the peaceful activity around Vega Prime. Ships from dozens of worlds worked together on construction projects, scientific research, and cultural exchange programs that would have been impossible under hegemony rule. Can I ask you something personal? Kayla said finally. Of course. What was it like, growing up knowing your entire species was essentially in exile, knowing that your parents and grandparents had made the choice to abandon everything rather than submit? Maria considered the question. Frightening sometimes, but also liberating. We grew up knowing that no situation is permanent, no enemy is unbeatable, and no problem is unsolvable if you're willing to think creatively enough. Most species learn to accept limitations. Humans learn to overcome them. And if you had failed? If the coalition plan hadn't worked? Then we would have tried something else, Maria said simply. That's what humans do. We adapt, we learn, and we try again. The hegemony could have killed us, but they could never have broken us, because breaking requires accepting that your current situation is permanent. As if to emphasize her point, another ship appeared in the orbital traffic. This one carrying former hegemony officials who were now working as advisors to newly independent worlds, helping them avoid the mistakes that had led to galactic tyranny in the first place. I think I understand now, Kayla said. This wasn't just about defeating the hegemony. It was about proving that a different kind of galactic civilization was possible. Exactly, Maria smiled. And the best part is, we're just getting started. Wait until you see what we can accomplish when every species in the galaxy is free to contribute their best ideas. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, no longer territories to be conquered, but destinations to be explored by free beings working together. The nightmare of endless conquest had ended, replaced by the dream of infinite possibility. In the end, that had been the humans' greatest weapon, not their ships or their technology or their strategic planning, but their unwavering belief that tomorrow could be better than today, and their willingness to work for as long as it took to make that belief reality. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what the humans had planned all along.